Story 1. This was my first security gig right out of the military. It was a good starter job for security work, involving access control at a medium-sized aircraft engine factory. A friend of mine worked in human resources there, but also held the title of head of security, so he offered me a job and I accepted. One of the biggest rules was ID checks. Apparently, a few years prior, a couple of people had gotten in with photocopied IDs. So after that, we had to physically check that the ID was plastic. We did this by touching it. Now, do access control enough and you start to memorize people. We didn't check those IDs by touching them because we knew them, and if they had been fired, we would have gotten a notice. Well, that angered the head of human resources, so she set some new rules. She wasn't the head of security, but security fell under human resources, so she kind of was. All IDs must be checked, no exceptions. No non-employee is allowed through the gate without a notice signed by her or the head of security, and it has to be submitted 12 hours prior to their entry, like for people scheduled for interviews. Visitor badges assigned without prior approval can only be done for normal delivery like the post office or FedEx. Anyone who violates it will be reported by security to human resources for a security violation. That was fine and dandy. We really didn't care. Everything went smoothly for about a month until that one day. Here she comes to the gate, but she isn't driving. Her husband is. It is raining, and I mean flood-level raining. I asked her husband for his ID, and he said he didn't have one. She saw where this was going and tried to stop me. He was only there to take her in because it was raining, and she didn't want to walk from her car to the building and ruin her outfit. That's when I threw the rules back to her. I didn't have a security notice for him, so I couldn't assign a badge and couldn't let him in. She tried the, but it's only 100 yards argument, which again I reminded her of the rule she set down. She actually said, well, I'm your boss. Technically she wasn't. We are going in anyway, to which I replied again about her rule that any breaches of policy must be reported as a security violation. So there she is, dressed to the nines, forced to walk without a jacket to the building, 100 yards, in the rain to get to her office. Why didn't we lend her a security rain jacket, you ask? Because she said there wasn't enough money in the security budget to buy them. Later that day, she modified the rules so that on drop-offs, security has full discretion to allow someone entry for that purpose. We also got our rain jackets 2 weeks later, and she never bothered security again. Story 2. I was working as a long-term substitute teacher back in 2007. A student who was never on time and never did any work was having a meeting with her guidance counselor. This school had them in the classroom. Because of these meetings, the kids were working on book work, while I was doing grades for said meetings. The student told me to tell the guidance counselor that she was passing and could move on to United States History 2 next spring. I told her I didn't want to discuss grades in front of the class, but we could go into the hallway and discuss it there. I had told every student before her the same thing, though in most cases I just wrote their year-to-date grade on a sticky note, which was usually enough. Most students had low B's to high A's. The students were offered a time slot to discuss their grade after school if they wished. Until this student, this was working just fine. She had skipped the part where she was supposed to get her grade slip. She was late. So she didn't get the instructions and didn't listen when told afterward. Her classmates reminded her that she needed her sticky note, but she waved them off. The guidance counselor reminded her. She just sat down, and the counselor gave a much put-upon sigh and started working. A few minutes later, I get a, "Mister, I need you to tell her I'm passing this class." "Well, I have your grade right here. Just pick it up," I replied. "No, just tell me. I want everyone to know how great my grades are here." Apparently, she had been bragging for some reason that she was acing my class. Also, apparently, her classmates thought it was a hilarious joke, considering several were suppressing laughter by that point. "I don't want to discuss your grades in front of everyone." But she kept insisting, rather than come up and get the slip, a mere 10 feet 3.048 meters away from where she was working. One of the students shouted out, "Mister, she doesn't care, just tell her." At this point, most of the class and the guidance counselor started to get the biggest grins. The counselor added, "If she wants you to inform everyone, then I suggest you inform everyone." Reluctantly, it took another minute or so of my trying to say no. I shared her grade. X, your grade is a 2. Not 2.0, but 2%. There is no way you're going to pass this class unless you and I come to an agreement about your schoolwork. Wait, how did I get a 2? Came the confused reply. Because you signed your name on all of the tests and quizzes, and because you came to class on time some of the time. But what does that mean, mister? She asked with continued confusion or a really good attempt to play innocent. At this point, one of the other students chimed in. You got the pity grade, and at that point, the guidance counselor hung up her phone, having, unnoticed, set up a parent-teacher conference in her office for later that week. At that point, the student was sent back to her desk for the next student to come. Aftermath. It ended up being a long meeting. 4 core subject teachers, the counselor, the student, mom, and grandma. She had her meeting and was told by each teacher what she had to do to have a chance of passing their classes with only half the time left. My plan for her was 100% attendance with no tardies late arrivals without a note, make up all the missing assignments, and then to complete not get 100% or even passing, just complete everything, and she would pass. Anything over that would improve her grade proportionally. She agreed, and then after 2 days stopped trying and eventually had to repeat the grade. Story 3. I just called my dad about this subreddit, and he gave me this story. It is his, not mine. He worked in a factory for 33 years. Close to his retirement, he gets a new boss. Now Dad says he should have had that guy's position and was offered it, but he turned it down due to it being a non-union position. He just stayed with his union position of group leader. Now this guy was a young college graduate with no experience working in a factory and took perverse pleasure in his authority. Anyway, one day the line Dad is working on goes down, so Dad tells the other 4 people on the line to scatter and help some other lines while he helps maintenance get that line back up. While helping maintenance, here comes that boss kid of his. He jumped Dad. It is against company policy for group leaders to help maintenance. Also, it is against company policy for the others on the line to work on another line. In other words, you can only work on that line that day. You also couldn't help maintain it. So Dad gets the other line workers, and they head to the break room. The kid's boss comes in wondering what they are doing. It wasn't break time. Well, Dad reminded him. The line was down, they weren't allowed to help fix it or work on another line. And company policy states that if you are not actively working on the floor, you have to be outside or in the break room. So they stayed in that break room, watching TV for 6 hours and got paid for it. The next day, the policy was changed so that group leaders were no longer allowed to work on a line. They were each in charge of 6 lines and were to only supervise and do quality control. Also, anytime a line goes down, the group leader can reassign people on that line to others. But it isn't over. Fast forward a few weeks. They had 2 call-outs on one 5-man line. Dad shut the whole line down and reassigned the remaining people for the day. Kid boss doesn't like this because the line was part of a big order processing, and it would hurt his on-time bonus. He told Dad to grab the other 3 and help them on the line. Dad reminded him he was no longer allowed to work on the line, and company policy stated each line can only be missing 1 person and still operate. Dad said in 33 years of his sticking to the rules exactly caused no less than 200 policy changes. Story 4. So this happened earlier this year, not too long after we'd gone into lockdown. We were all working from home and checking in daily with our teams virtually. One evening, I start getting horrific period cramps. I have endometriosis, polycystic ovary syndrome, and a history of gynecological issues, so I'm no stranger to this pain. I'm up most of the night in pain and trying not to vomit, so naturally, I'm exhausted and still fighting the pain when the morning rolls around. I message my boss telling him I'm not feeling well, and he rings me to ask what's wrong. It's obviously a pretty embarrassing subject, especially with a male boss, and so I'm deliberately quite vague about it and probably come across as avoiding the questions. Later that day, I log into my work emails and see an email from my boss to his manager, with my name as the subject. He accidentally copied me into his email about me calling in sick and being deliberately vague about my illness. He finishes the email with, "We need to keep an eye on this." So, I hit a reply all and write them both the following email. Dear boss, I'm guessing I wasn't supposed to be copied in on this, but seeing as I am, I feel I need to set a few things straight. I have been up most of the night with excruciating period pains, which make me vomit and not sleep. I have blood clots coming out of me, my reproductive system hates me, and there is literally nothing I can do about it. I've had this for years, but every now and again it gets too bad for even me to handle, and I need a day off to deal with it. I am sure you can understand that discussing such matters with my male managers is not easy, hence the reluctance to talk about this over the phone. If you require any further information, please let me know, and I will gladly assist. Needless to say, I had 2 very hasty replies apologizing for copying me into their emails and emphasizing that periods are not a taboo subject with them, and hoping that I feel better soon. Story 5. So this is about 5 years ago. I worked as a chef at a bakery. It was my job to make everything but the baked goods. Every morning, the baker and I would walk in at about 4 a.m. and knock out all the food needed for the day. This would leave me ready to go home around 10 a.m. or so. This put us at the perfect time to deliver online orders. It was common for companies or other entities to place large catering orders with us. The baker and I would split them down the middle and deliver them on our way home. The delivery in question was for Bob, Deck, and Harry, attorneys at law. I had never delivered to BD and H before, but they were a regular of sorts. Every financial quarter, they would hold a huge meeting. This meeting would require roughly $700 of bagels and bagel accessories. This spread included 8 dozen bagels, all 10 of our flavors of cream cheese, pastries, brownies, and enough coffee to power a college dorm through finals week. My passenger seat, entire back seat, and entire trunk are filled with food. Now BD and H is located on the 9th floor of a commercial skyscraper deep in an industrial complex downtown. Parking was non-existent. There were meters outside the building, but I knew I would need close to 10 trips to deliver all this food and didn't have a lot of change on me. Company policy was to just pay whatever fines I needed to park and then turn in my receipts. The money would end up on my next paycheck. So the building has its own parking garage, so I pull on in. The security guard, let's call him Sam, stops me and says that the parking garage is for employees only. I happily show him my delivery invoice and offer him a bribery bagel, never leave the store without at least 2. Sam refuses the bagel and says I can park in one of the guest spots on the bottom floor. The fee is $5 for every 30 minutes, minimum $10. I thank him and head to the bottom floor of the garage. So there are a total of 6 guest parking spaces. Just 6. All of them are taken. I head back up to talk to Sam when I see an open parking spot reserved for Bob, Deck, and Harry, attorneys at law. There are cars in every spot, with many spots being reserved for employees by name. The last spot is empty and is reserved for a guest of BD and H. Perfect. I pull on in. I grab the most important part of the delivery, the coffee, and head to the stairwell. I get into the elevator and hit the button for floor 9. The elevator asks for my employee ID card. Well, crud. So I tried the lobby. That works. From there, it's 9 flights of stairs until I am outside the law firm of Bob, Deck, and Harry. After introducing myself, I am shown to the room where the meeting will take place. A table is set aside for me. I set down the coffee and head for trip number 2. That is when I see Sam talking to the receptionist. He runs over and starts shouting at me. I am putting a boot on your darn car. I told you to park as a guest on the bottom floor. I don't get a word in before he launches into a speech about security and how I could be hurting his building where people. That is when a very well-dressed man walks over. It so happens to be Bob, the Bob of Bob, Deck, and Harry's. Bob asks what the problem is, and soon the two are arguing. Bob. Op is delivering food for my meeting. He is allowed to use my parking spots. Sam. Those parking spots belong to the building. You are leasing them like you lease this floor. I am the one who says who can park there. He isn't an employee, so he isn't parking. Bob. Then I am making him an employee. Sam. You can't do that. Bob. You know what? You are right. Harry, get over here. Harry walks over with an amused look on his face. Bob. Harry here is the head of our human resources department. Harry, hire this boy. Harry pulls out a piece of paper and scribbles. Op is now a member of Bob, Deck, and Harry's and signs it, then asks me to sign as well. I do so. Bob reaches over to the receptionist, who is already grabbing some things. Bob, here is your employee badge, your parking permit, and your elevator key card. Now please, do the job I have hired you to do, and deliver my bagels. Sam looks on in utter fury as I ride the elevator down to my car. 7 sweet elevator rides later, all the food is delivered. Bob and Harry meet me at the table. Bob. Op, you have made great strides in this company, and I am proud of your work, but I feel it is time for us to part ways. Here is your final check. Bob then hands me a crisp $50 bill. Harry, and your severance package. Now please be sure to return your badge and card on the way out. Harry hands me a $20 and sends me on my way. The receptionist is sure to validate the parking ticket that Sam gave me, and I head on out. On the way out, Sam grins at me and asks for my ticket. I place it in the machine in his station. It sees the validation I got and lets me out for free. Sam glares at me as I drive off into the late morning sun.